The desert wind blew hard across the canyon, carrying sand that stung the cowboy's face. Jacob Harlan rode slowly through the wide and empty land, his eyes sharp, scanning for any sign of movement. His horse snorted from exhaustion, but Jacob kept going. He had been tracking hoofprints since dawn, and he was certain they belonged to his missing horses. 2 of them had been taken from his ranch the night before, and he wasn't a man to let thieves go free. The land around him looked endless, flat, dry, and silent, except for the wind's lonely song. The sun was beginning to sink, turning the sky red like fire. The air smelled of dust and distant rain, though clouds were still far away. Jacob's clothes were worn, his hat faded from years of sun, and his revolver hung heavy at his side. He had lived through wars, storms, and betrayals, but losing his horses made him angrier than anything else. They were his only family now. As he rode deeper into the canyon, he saw a flicker of movement near a dead mesquite tree. He pulled the reins tight and stopped. His hand went to his gun automatically. There was someone there, small, quiet, and still. For a long moment, only the dry grass moved. Then she appeared. A woman stepped out from behind the rocks, holding a rope tied around a bay horse's neck. His horse. Jacob's body stiffened. His pulse beat hard in his ears. She was Apache. He could tell from her braided hair, her tattered deerskin dress, and the beads around her neck. She looked thin and tired, her skin darkened by the sun, her bare feet covered in dust. He lifted his gun. "That's my horse," he said coldly. His voice echoed between the canyon walls. The woman froze, her dark eyes wide with fear. The wind pulled at her hair, and she swallowed hard before speaking. "Please," she said in a trembling voice. "Don't shoot. I didn't steal. I found him wandering." He was hurt. Jacob didn't believe her. He had heard such words before. The frontier had taught him not to trust anyone. Too many times he had seen good men tricked, robbed, or worse. His finger rested on the trigger. "Where are the others?" he demanded. "There were 2. She shook her head quickly. "I only found this one," she said. "No others." Her voice was soft, yet there was truth hidden in it, or maybe sorrow. Jacob narrowed his eyes, studying her. "Why are you out here alone?" he asked. "Where's your tribe?" She hesitated before answering, as if the words were painful. "Gone," she said quietly. "All gone. Soldiers came. They burned the village. I ran." Her eyes looked empty for a moment, as if she had already seen too much death. Jacob frowned. The war between settlers and Apaches had left scars everywhere. He himself had lost a wife during a raid. He had buried her with his own hands and swore he'd never trust an Apache again. But something about this woman made him pause. She wasn't armed. Her hands were trembling. Her voice wasn't proud or defiant, it was simply tired. Still, his gun stayed raised. "You expect me to believe you just found my horse wandering here?" he said harshly. She looked at him directly for the first time. "I saw him by the river," she said. "His leg was cut by wire. I cleaned the wound." Jacob's heart thudded once. He glanced at the horse. The animal's left leg did have a small wound, covered by a rough cloth bandage. He blinked. It looked like someone had tried to help it. "Why would you do that?" he asked. She looked down at the ground, her voice almost lost to the wind. "Because I know what pain feels like." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sky had turned deeper red, shadows stretching long across the sand. The moment felt heavy. 2 lives standing still at the edge of danger and mercy. Jacob lowered the gun a little, but he didn't put it away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Naira," she said softly. "Daughter of Chief Loya." He nodded slowly, the name faintly familiar. "And what do you want from me, Naira?" She gave a small, hopeless smile. "Nothing," she said. "Just not death." Her answer struck him harder than he expected. It was simple, honest, and heavy with truth. Jacob stared at her, at the dirt on her skin, the cut on her arm, the exhaustion in her eyes. He saw someone who had walked through fire and had nothing left to lose. He sighed, lowering his weapon completely. "You can let go of the horse," he said quietly. Naira hesitated, then slowly dropped the rope. The horse snorted and walked toward Jacob's side like it remembered its master. Jacob patted its neck, still watching her carefully. "What will you do now?" he asked. She looked around the canyon, empty and endless. "I don't know," she admitted. "There's nowhere for me to go." Jacob said nothing. He wasn't a man used to pity, but something inside him stirred. Maybe guilt, maybe humanity. He holstered his gun and adjusted his hat. "You'd better start walking before dark," he muttered. "The coyotes come down when the moon rises." She took a step back but didn't move further. "I can work," she said quickly. "I can cook, clean, sew, please. Don't send me away," Jacob frowned. "Why should I trust you?" "Because," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "I helped your horse when I could have ridden away on him. I didn't run, that was true." He had to admit that. She could have escaped with the horse long before he found her. Instead, she waited and faced a gun. Jacob stared at her again long and hard. He remembered his wife's face, soft, kind, and now gone. He remembered the night the raiders came, the smoke, the gunfire, and the cry of his daughter who never woke again. His heart had become stone after that, but looking at Naira standing barefoot and shaking, he realized she was not his enemy. She was just another soul left broken by the same cruel land. "You're lucky I'm not the kind of man who shoots without reason," he said finally. She nodded, eyes glistening in the fading light. "I thank you," she whispered. "You have mercy." Jacob turned his horse toward the trail. He didn't look back at first, but after a few steps, he heard the faint sound of her walking behind him. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked sharply. "You said not to stay," she replied, "so I follow until I find a place." He exhaled through his nose, half annoyed, half uncertain. The canyon was no place for a woman alone. The nearest town was 15 miles away, and even there she wouldn't be safe. He knew what kind of men lurked in saloons after dark. He looked over his shoulder at her again, small, fragile, determined. "Fine," he said gruffly. "You can walk behind me. I'll take you as far as my ranch. You'll have food for the night, then we'll see what comes next." Her face softened, her lips trembling with relief. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Jacob muttered. "You're still a stranger." They started walking together as the sun disappeared completely, leaving only the silver light of a rising moon. The air grew cooler, and the cries of distant coyotes echoed over the rocks. The silence between them was long but not empty. Jacob led the way on horseback. Naira followed behind, her footsteps light and careful. When they reached the top of the ridge, Jacob looked back once more. The canyon lay quiet and empty now, the wind smoothing away all signs of what had just happened. Two broken lives crossing by chance. Jacob didn't know why he let her live, or why he let her come with him. But something deep inside whispered that this meeting, born from mistrust and dust, would change both their lives forever. As they moved toward the dark horizon, the stars began to appear, cold, distant, and bright over the Wild West night. The night was cold when Jacob and Naira reached the small ranch that sat on the edge of the valley. The moonlight fell softly on the wooden fences and the little cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. It wasn't much, a barn, a few sheds, and a corral, but it was all Jacob had built with his own hands after losing everything. The place looked lonely under the wide sky, but to Naira it was safer than the open desert. Jacob climbed down from his horse and tied the reins near the porch. Naira stood a few feet away, shivering from the wind but not daring to move closer until he spoke. He looked at her for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had never brought anyone home since his wife passed. The cabin had been silent for years, except for the sound of wind whistling through the gaps in the boards. Now the silence felt different, uncomfortable, uncertain. "You can come inside," he said finally, "but just for tonight." Naira nodded quickly. She followed him up the steps, her bare feet quiet on the wood. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke, old leather, and dust. A small lamp burned on the table. The walls were rough logs, and a single picture hung above the fireplace, a woman's face drawn in charcoal, smiling faintly. Naira looked at it but said nothing. Jacob poured some water from a jug and set it in front of her. "Drink," he said. She lifted it carefully, sipping slowly like someone afraid to waste a drop. He sat down opposite her, watching as she glanced around, her eyes stopping on every small detail, the tools, the saddle, the empty rocking chair in the corner. She seemed nervous, like she expected him to shout or throw her out at any moment. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "You said your name was Naira," he said. "What happened to your people?" Her hands tightened around the cup. "The soldiers came at dawn," she said quietly. "They said they wanted peace, but they brought fire instead." Her voice broke and she stared at the floor. "I ran into the hills. When I came back, there was nothing left, only ashes. Jacob leaned back in his chair, saying nothing for a long moment. He had heard similar stories before, but hearing it from her made it feel heavier, more real. The war between settlers and tribes had destroyed too many lives. She looked up at him suddenly. "You lost someone too," she said softly. His eyes flickered toward the drawing on the wall. "Yes," he said after a pause. "My wife." Silence fell again. Outside, the coyotes howled in the distance. Naira wrapped her arms around herself, trying to warm her shaking body. Jacob noticed how thin she looked. Her cheeks were hollow, her hands rough from hard work and travel. He stood up and went to the cupboard. After a moment, he placed a small loaf of bread and a piece of dried meat on the table. "Eat," he said simply. She hesitated, then began to eat slowly, carefully, as if afraid to take too much. Jacob turned toward the window, looking out at the dark land. The sight of her eating made something tighten in his chest. He told himself he was only helping out of pity, but deep down he knew it was more than that. When she finished, she looked at him with grateful eyes. "You have a kind heart," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, just a lonely one." She didn't answer. The fire cracked in the small hearth, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Jacob finally spoke again, his voice firm but not harsh. "You can sleep by the fire tonight. There's a blanket in the trunk." Naira nodded. "Thank you." She spread the old blanket near the warm ashes and lay down, closing her eyes. Jacob sat in his chair for a long time, staring at the flames. He couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of her words, her fear, her tired eyes. As the night deepened, he heard her whisper something in her native tongue. Soft words that sounded like a prayer. Then she went still. Jacob stood, walked quietly to the window, and looked out at the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf cried. He wondered if bringing her here had been a mistake, but his heart told him otherwise. Something about her presence filled the cabin with life again. A fragile, trembling life, but life nonetheless. The next morning, the sound of clattering pots woke him. Naira was already awake, kneeling by the stove. She had found some flour and was making small flatbread. The smell of it drifted through the cabin. Jacob sat up, surprised. "You don't have to do that," he said. She smiled faintly. "I said I would work for food." "This is work." He didn't argue. It had been years since he'd heard someone humming softly in that cabin. And though he wouldn't admit it, the sound eased something heavy inside him. After breakfast, he saddled his horse and checked the fences while Naira cleaned the barn. She worked hard, never complaining, never asking for anything. The sun climbed high and burned down on the valley, but she kept going, her hands raw from rough wood. When Jacob came back, he saw her trying to lift a heavy bucket of water. "Leave that," he said quickly, taking it from her. She looked startled. "I can do it." "I said leave it," he repeated, not unkindly. "You'll hurt yourself." For a second, they stared at each other, two stubborn souls not used to kindness. Then Naira lowered her eyes and nodded. "Yes, sir." That night, as they ate in silence, Jacob noticed how carefully she avoided looking at him too long. It wasn't fear, it was something else, something harder to name. Respect, maybe, or gratitude. After dinner, when she went outside to fetch more wood, he watched from the doorway. The moonlight touched her hair, and he could see how tired she still was. He realized that he had stopped thinking of her as an intruder. She was just a woman trying to survive, same as him. Later that evening, as they sat near the fire, Naira spoke again. "Why did you not shoot me that day?" she asked quietly. Jacob looked into the flames. "Maybe I was tired of killing," he said. "Maybe I saw someone who didn't deserve to die." She nodded slowly. "You saved me." He shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. You could have run, but you stayed." She smiled faintly, then said something that made his heart twist. "When I saw your gun rise, I thought my life would end. I had no strength left. That's why I said those words." He frowned. "What words?" She looked down, her voice trembling. "I said, stop. I'll be your obedient wife. I thought maybe mercy would come if I begged." Jacob's breath caught. He remembered her voice echoing in the canyon, the desperation in her eyes. He remembered how his hand had shaken as he lowered his gun. He stared at her quietly. "You thought I would make you my wife by force?" She nodded, ashamed. "Men do that. When they have power, they use it." Jacob's expression hardened, but not from anger at her. He hated that she had lived through such fear. "I don't take what isn't freely given," he said firmly. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in silence after that, the fire popping gently. The night was calm, and the land outside slept under the stars. For the first time in years, Jacob didn't feel haunted by ghosts. When the lamp went out, he lay down on his cot, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Naira breathing softly near the fire. He closed his eyes, but her words echoed in his mind. "Stop. I'll be your obedient wife." He wondered what kind of world had made her think that was the only way to live. He made a quiet promise to himself then, that as long as she stayed under his roof, she would never have to say those words again. As the night deepened, the wind grew gentle, and the sound of horses moving in the corral filled the air. Jacob finally drifted into sleep, not knowing that this fragile peace was only the beginning of a bond that would test both their hearts in ways neither could imagine. The next few weeks passed quietly on Jacob's ranch. The land began to soften with the early signs of spring, and the grass grew a little greener near the creek. Each day started before sunrise. Jacob would ride out to check the herd, while Naira took care of the chores. She learned quickly how to mend fences, milk the cow, and plant small rows of corn near the barn. She never complained, even when her hands were sore and her back ached. Jacob often watched her from a distance. He tried not to, but his eyes would find her without meaning to. She moved with quiet strength, her step sure and graceful. He had seen many women in his life, but there was something about Naira's calmness that silenced his heart. She never wasted words, never asked for anything, and carried herself with a dignity that didn't belong to the broken or the weak. One morning, he noticed her standing by the corral, looking toward the hills with a lost expression. Her hair blew in the wind, and for a moment she looked like a spirit of the land itself, lonely, untamed, and free. Jacob rode up beside her and asked softly, "You thinking of leaving?" She turned to him quickly, shaking her head. "No," she said. "I was just remembering. My home was beyond those hills. The wind there smelled of pine trees." Jacob looked toward the distant horizon. "I've never been that far," he said. "You would have liked it," she replied. There was music every night. The old ones told stories by the fire. Children laughed. Her voice broke a little. "Now it's all gone." Jacob wanted to say something comforting, but words never came easy to him. Instead, he said quietly, "You're safe here. That's what matters now." She smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed sad. "Safety is something I forgot the meaning of," she said. "But you've been kind. I won't forget that." That day, Jacob rode into town for supplies. The people there still whispered about him. The quiet cowboy who lived alone, the man who had lost everything. When he entered the general store, the shopkeeper greeted him politely, but his eyes wandered. "You got someone new helping on your ranch?" he asked with a careful tone. Jacob looked up sharply. "Why?" "Word gets around," the man said. "Some folks saw a woman working your fields. Ain't no ordinary lady," they said. "Dark hair, copper skin. Apache, maybe." Jacob's jaw tightened. He could already feel the judgment in the man's words. "She works hard," he said simply. "That's all anyone needs to know." The shopkeeper nodded but didn't look convinced. "Be careful," he said in a low voice. "There's men around who don't take kindly to your kind of charity. They say all Apaches should be behind bars or worse." Jacob didn't answer. He gathered his things, paid for them, and left. But as he rode home, his anger burned quietly inside him. He knew what people in town could do when they got drunk and mean. He had seen it before, justice turning into cruelty. When he reached the ranch, Naira was waiting by the gate. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment the tension faded. "You look worried," she said softly. He nodded. "Some men in town don't like that you're here." Her face grew pale. "Then I should leave," Jacob frowned. "No, you didn't do anything wrong. You're staying." "But they'll bring trouble," she said. "I don't want that for you." He looked at her firmly. "If trouble comes, it'll find me anyway. I'm not letting you face it alone." That night, the wind picked up and the sky turned dark. Jacob sat near the fire cleaning his revolver, while Naira mended an old shirt beside him. The silence between them was gentle, not awkward. She hummed a tune in her own language, a soft, haunting melody that made the flame seem to dance slower. When she finished sewing, she looked up and said quietly, "You protect me like you protect your land." Jacob didn't answer right away. "I protect what's right," he said finally. "That's all," she nodded. "Where I come from, men protect their wives and families. You have no one left to protect. Maybe that's why God sent me. Jacob's hand froze for a moment. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Don't say things like that, he murmured. I don't need saving. Her lips curved slightly. Maybe not saving, she said. Just peace. The next afternoon, trouble found them just as Jacob feared. 3 riders appeared on the dirt road leading to his ranch. He recognized them as men from the saloon, loud talkers who carried rifles and drank more than they could handle. When they stopped at the gate, Jacob walked out to meet them. The leader, a tall man with a scar on his cheek, grinned. Heard you got yourself a new helper, he said. An Apache woman, right? Must be nice having one of them around. Jacob's face darkened. She's here to work, nothing more, the man laughed. Work? That what you call it? Folks in town don't like it, Harlan. They think you're siding with the enemy. Jacob's hand rested near his revolver. You tell those folks to mind their own business. The man leaned closer. Or what, you'll shoot us? Over an Indian? Before Jacob could speak, Naira stepped out from the barn, her hands stained with hay and dust. She stood quietly behind him, her chin lifted. The men turned their eyes on her, sneering. Well, look at that, one of them said. She's a pretty one. Didn't think they could look this tame. Jacob's blood boiled. Watch your mouth, he warned. The scarred man smirked. You gonna fight for her? Without answering, Jacob drew his revolver and aimed it straight at the man's chest. The sound of the hammer cocking filled the air. The men froze. You're standing on my land, Jacob said coldly, and I don't allow dogs to bark on it. You ride off now or you won't ride again. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the scarred man spat in the dust and turned his horse. This ain't over, he muttered before galloping away with the others. When they were gone, Naira stood still, breathing fast. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. They'll come back. Jacob looked at her calmly. Then I'll be ready. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat near the window, staring out at the moonlit fields. Jacob noticed her worry but didn't know what to say. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her. I've dealt with worse, he said quietly. She took the cup, her hands trembling slightly. You risked your life for me today, she said. Why? He shrugged. Because it was right, she smiled faintly. You say that a lot. He looked at her, his eyes softer than before. It's the only thing that keeps me from turning into what I hate. Naira turned toward the window again, her eyes full of thoughts. She didn't speak. When I saw those men, I thought they would take me, she said quietly. It reminded me of the soldiers. I thought it was the end again. Jacob's voice was low. Not while I'm here. Their eyes met, and in that silence something shifted between them, something fragile and wordless. It wasn't love yet, not exactly, but it was trust, the kind that grows from fire and fear shared between 2 broken souls. When she finally lay down to rest, Jacob sat awake, watching the flames burn low. The desert wind whispered outside. But inside the cabin there was warmth, a strange, quiet warmth he hadn't felt in years. He looked at her sleeping near the hearth, her face peaceful for the first time since he'd met her. He thought about the words she had said before. Maybe that's why God sent me. He didn't know if he believed in God anymore. But looking at her, he almost wanted to. Outside, a wolf howled again, and Jacob whispered under his breath, let them come. I'll protect her. And with that promise, he finally closed his eyes. As the firelight danced over their small world, a cowboy, an Apache woman, and a fragile hope, trying to survive in the heart of the Wild West. The following morning was quiet, almost too quiet. The ranch lay bathed in golden sunlight, the fences casting long shadows over the dirt paths. Jacob was up early checking the herd while Naira fed the chickens and swept the small porch. She moved with careful attention, her hands steady despite the fear that had never fully left her since that first encounter in the canyon. Jacob noticed her glancing frequently toward the distant hills. Something in her eyes tugged at him, a mixture of memory and worry. He didn't ask at first, but when she brought him water for his horse, he finally spoke. You're thinking of them, he said quietly. Naira's hands froze. I saw them again in my dreams, she admitted. The soldiers, the ones who came to my village. I can't forget, Jacob's heart tightened. He had seen too many faces in the shadows of his past, faces of people taken, homes burned, families destroyed. He understood that kind of memory. It's not your fault, he said softly. She shook her head. I ran. I should have stayed. I should have helped them. Jacob walked closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. You did what you had to. You survived. That's all anyone could do. For a long moment, she let him hold her. Then she stepped back, wiping her hands on her apron. I don't want to be weak, she said. I want to help here. I want to work, Jacob nodded. Then you will. The next days passed in a rhythm both familiar and new. Naira learned quickly how to milk the cow, patch holes in the fence, and cook over the fire. Her hands became strong, her movements confident. She even managed to coax a stubborn mule into the barn without help. Jacob watched from the porch, occasionally giving instructions but mostly letting her work. One evening, after a long day under the hot sun, they sat near the fire. Naira was quietly mending a tear in one of Jacob's shirts. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of coyotes in the distance. Jacob, she said softly, breaking the silence. Can I ask you something? He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Sure. Why did you save me? Her voice was almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. Jacob didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames, remembering the first moment he had seen her in the canyon, trembling and terrified. Because it was the right thing to do, he said finally. No one deserves to die because of others' cruelty. She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave his. You didn't have to, she said. You could have ridden away, left me. I could have, he admitted. But I didn't, and you know why? Because I've seen what it's like to lose someone, and I won't let anyone else feel that alone if I can help it. Her lips trembled, but she smiled faintly. You're different from the men I've known. And you're different from the women I've known, he replied quietly. You're strong. You survive. For a moment they sat in silence, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside the stars shone brightly, scattered across the endless desert sky. The wind carried a gentle chill, but inside the small cabin there was warmth, a warmth that had been missing from both of their lives for years. Suddenly, the sound of hooves approached from the dirt road. Jacob's hand went to his revolver instinctively. He stepped outside with Naira close behind him. 3 riders appeared in the distance, dust rising from their path. They were strangers, but Jacob could sense trouble before it even reached them. As they drew near, Jacob recognized the men as bounty hunters who had been traveling near the town. They laughed loudly, the sound carrying across the valley. One of them sneered when he saw Naira standing by Jacob's side. Well, what do we have here? The tallest one said, spitting into the dust. A cowboy with a half-breed woman? Must be a pretty sight. Jacob's jaw tightened. She's not your business, he said. The man laughed, swinging his rifle lazily. Everything on this land is my business if I say it is. Looks like you're hiding someone. Naira's hands clenched at her sides. Her eyes, usually calm and steady, flashed with fear. Jacob stepped in front of her, placing himself between the strangers and the woman he had promised to protect. I said she's not your business, he repeated, voice low and steady. Now turn your horses around and leave, or you won't ride back again. The men hesitated. The tallest one sneered and raised his rifle slightly. You're bluffing, cowboy. Jacob's hand moved in a blur, drawing his revolver and aiming carefully. I'm not, he said. A tense silence fell over the ranch. The fire in the cabin reflected in Jacob's eyes, and Naira could see the resolve in him, a resolve she had never seen before. She realized that he was willing to risk everything for her, even his own life. Finally, the man spat in the dust, muttering curses under his breath. This isn't over, he said, but we'll leave for now. The riders turned their horses and rode off, kicking up dust that swirled in the wind. Naira let out a quiet breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Jacob lowered his revolver slowly. Go back inside, he said. Lock the door. She nodded, trembling, and did as he said. Jacob stood at the doorway for a long moment, watching the dust settle, ensuring they were truly gone. Only when he was certain did he turn back to the cabin. Inside, Naira was sitting by the fire, her hands clasped tightly together. Jacob set his revolver down and sat opposite her. You're safe now, he said. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. I thought I would die again, she whispered. Jacob reached across the table and took her hands gently in his own. Not while I'm here, he said. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with a comforting warmth. Naira looked at him, her fear slowly giving way to trust. She had learned something important. This man, this cowboy who had almost shot her on sight, was now her protector. And more than that, he had a kindness she had never expected to find in the wild desert. The days that followed were a mixture of work, quiet moments, and careful learning. Naira continued to tend the land, learning the ways of the ranch. She mended fences, fed the animals, and cooked meals with care. Jacob sometimes watched her from a distance, impressed by her resilience. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Naira approached Jacob with a small bundle of cloth. "I made this for you," she said softly. He opened it to find a hand-sewn shirt, neat and carefully stitched. Jacob raised his eyebrows. "You made this?" She nodded. "I wanted to give you something. For your help. For your kindness." Jacob looked at her, surprised and humbled. "You didn't have to," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. "You saved me when no one else would. I want to show my thanks." He nodded slowly, touched by her gesture. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "Thank you." That night they sat by the fire again, the warmth spreading through the cabin. Naira hummed softly, and Jacob listened, feeling a peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time since he had lost his wife, he felt hope. That maybe the future wouldn't be as lonely, as harsh, or as empty as the past had been. Outside, the stars shone over the quiet valley. Inside, a cowboy and an Apache woman shared a fragile, unspoken bond built on trust, survival, and the first hints of something deeper. The Wild West was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but for the first time, Jacob and Naira felt that they might face it together. The days grew warmer as spring settled over the valley. The ranch was alive with soft sounds. The lowing of cows, the gentle creak of the barn doors, and the wind rustling through the grasses. Jacob and Naira had settled into a routine, working side by side without the words that often got in the way. There was trust now between them, unspoken but strong, and both knew that the other would face any danger to protect what they had built. One morning, Jacob rose before the sun, saddling his horse to check the far fields. Naira was already awake, kneeling by the garden, carefully planting seeds in straight rows. The frost had passed, leaving the earth soft and ready. She looked up when he passed by, offering a small smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied, tipping his hat. "The herd is fine. Just the usual trouble with the fences." She nodded, returning to her work. There was a quiet determination in her movements, a resilience that had grown stronger with each passing day. Jacob watched her from a distance, feeling a strange warmth in his chest he couldn't name. He had lived so long with loss and solitude that he had almost forgotten how it felt to care about someone beyond himself. As the sun climbed higher, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Jacob stiffened. Riders were coming again, moving fast toward the ranch. He spurred his horse and rode to meet them halfway, hand resting on his revolver. Naira followed quietly, her eyes wide with concern. The riders slowed as they neared the ranch. Jacob recognized them this time, bounty hunters who had caused trouble weeks before. They laughed and called out, trying to intimidate him. "You're hiding her again, Harlan," the leader said, a mean grin on his face. "You think we'll let that slide?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "She's not hiding. She works here. That's all." The men laughed and dismounted, their boots crunching on the dirt. Jacob stood firmly, his revolver ready. Naira stayed close, but she didn't shrink. She had learned to trust him, and now she understood that he would not let anyone harm her. The leader sneered. "You'll see, cowboy. We don't like Apaches around our town." Jacob's voice was low and steady. "This land is mine. If you step another foot on it with harm in mind, you won't leave." The men exchanged uneasy glances. They had faced Jacob before. They knew his aim was true. After a tense moment, they spat in the dirt and retreated, warning him that this was not the last time they would come. Jacob watched them leave, his hand still on the revolver. When the riders had disappeared, he turned to Naira. She looked pale but determined. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I am now," she said. "Because you were there." Jacob gave a small nod. "I'll always be here." That evening, after the sun had dipped below the hills, Naira and Jacob sat outside the cabin, tending the small fire that cast warm light over the porch. The air smelled of dust and smoke, but it was clean and the quiet made it easy to speak. "Jacob," she said softly, "I've been thinking." He looked at her, curious. "About what?" "About the past. About everything we've lost." She paused, her eyes glistening. "I lost my people, my home, my family. I thought I would never be safe again. And now I feel safe here. With you." Jacob didn't respond right away. He could feel the weight of her words pressing against his chest. He had thought safety was something to build alone, but she had reminded him that it could be shared. "You've done more than that," he said finally. "You've reminded me why life is worth living, why peace matters." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Then we have both been given a second chance," she said. He nodded, quietly agreeing. For the first time in years, Jacob felt a lightness he hadn't known. The land was still wild, still unpredictable, but he no longer felt as alone as he had before. The next weeks passed in a gentle rhythm. Naira continued her work with the animals, the garden, and the cabin. Jacob handled the larger tasks, mending fences, riding out to check distant fields, and ensuring the ranch stayed secure. They learned each other's habits, their silences comfortable and filled with trust. One afternoon, a messenger from town arrived with news. "Some men in town are talking," he said nervously. "They're surprised to hear you've been helping an Apache woman without trouble." They don't understand," Jacob frowned. "Doesn't matter," he said firmly. "We're not asking them to understand. We're living our lives here." Naira listened quietly, then said softly, "I've never known kindness like this. I've lived my life expecting fear, anger, or cruelty. But here, it's different. You've given me more than shelter. You've given me hope." Jacob looked at her, feeling the truth of her words. "Then stay. That's all I ask." Days later, Jacob noticed a change in the ranch itself. The fields seemed greener, the animals calmer. Even the small cabin felt more alive. Naira's presence had brought life and warmth back to a place that had felt empty for years. One evening after the chores were done, Naira went to the barn to check on the horses. Jacob followed silently. The sky above was painted with the colors of dusk, orange and purple blending into a deep blue. "You've done well," he said quietly, watching her work. She looked up, startled. "I'm just doing what I can." "More than that," he said. "You've made this place better, safer, happier." She smiled faintly, her cheeks flushing slightly. "And you've made me feel alive again," she admitted. Jacob hesitated. He wasn't a man of many words, but he understood what she meant. Life on the frontier had taught him that moments of trust and connection were rare. He had found one now in this woman who had once begged for her life. As night fell, they walked back to the cabin together. The moon rose high over the valley, casting silver light across the fields. They sat by the fire, the warmth from the flames a comfort against the cool night air. "Jacob," Naira whispered, "I never thought I would find a place to belong again." "You belong here," he said quietly. "With me, if you wish." Her eyes softened. "I do," she said. The words hung in the air, simple but heavy with meaning. They didn't need to speak of love or promises. Their trust, their shared hardships, and the safety they had found together said everything. The next morning they worked side by side in the fields, laughter mixing with the sounds of the animals and the wind. Jacob noticed how she moved with ease, how her confidence had grown. She no longer flinched at the sound of hooves or shadows. She had become part of the land, part of the ranch, and part of his life. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between them strengthened. Jacob realized that he had stopped measuring life by loss and danger. With Naira, life became about care, respect, and quiet moments of connection. She reminded him that the world, though harsh, still held goodness. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Naira sat on the porch with a small basket of freshly picked vegetables. Jacob joined her, setting down a bucket of water for the animals. The wind carried the smell of wildflowers, the first bloom of spring reaching the valley. "You've made this place our home," she said softly, smiling. He nodded. "Not just the place. We've made it together. That's what counts." She reached out and took his hand. He didn't pull away. The warmth of her grip, the strength in her eyes spoke more than words ever could. They had survived fear, danger, and loss. Now, they were building something new. Trust, peace, and a shared life in the Wild West. As the moon rose high, casting a gentle glow over the ranch, Jacob and Naira sat side by side, watching the valley. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of quiet days, safety, and a future together. The past, with all its pain, seemed distant now, replaced by a life of hope. The cowboy who had raised his gun in anger now rested it on the porch, knowing he would never need it for her. The Apache woman who had once begged for mercy now walked with strength and dignity. No longer a victim, but a partner in a shared life. And as the stars shone over the quiet desert, The ranch, the cabin, and the people within it breathed in unison, alive, safe, and full of the fragile, beautiful hope that only comes after hardship and survival. For Jacob and Naira, life in the Wild West was no longer just about surviving. It was about finding trust, companionship, and the courage to believe that the future could hold more than loss. They had found that in each other, and nothing, not fear, not prejudice, not even the harsh land, could take it away. The night stretched on, peaceful and calm. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to the moon, and the fire flickered softly between them. They watched together, two souls bound by experience, hardship, and the quiet strength of survival. The Wild West was still wild, but in that small corner of the desert, Jacob and Naira had carved a world of their own, one where safety, hope, and love could exist together.